Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to discuss paper one that we had in the February-March 2024 session. Now, about this paper, I'd like to use the marking scheme to help students understand what the marking mechanism is that the CI uses, and to possibly avoid making mistakes that eventually lead to students losing their marks. Before I begin, I'd like to clarify this explanation that I try to provide today is through the provisional marking scheme. Now, why the provisional marking scheme? Because as I speak today, it is April, and the marking scheme officially gets published later. Because the official marking scheme has not been published by the CI, we'd put the provisional marking scheme to use. Now, a quick reminder, paper one is on approaches, issues, and debates. Paper one is of 60 marks, just in case if someone does not remember, and you get 90 minutes, that is an hour and 30 minutes to attempt your paper. That, in other words, means you get 1.5 minutes per mark to write for a particular mark. Now, to begin with, if we have a look at this marking scheme, I'd like to quickly start off with question number one over here. The first question that we have over here says, from the study by Baron-Cohen et al., ICE test, identify the sampling technique used to recruit participants for group one. Now, understand the question, focus on the wordings of the question, understand the question. Once you've understood the question, do not waste time, quickly rush to the amount of marks that have been allotted to that particular question. So once you've done understanding the question, as a student, if I see this question, the question is about Baron-Cohen, and the question is demanding that I identify the sampling technique. Now, the sampling technique for a particular group, in this case, we're talking about group one. And if you remember group one comprised of participants who were autistic. So if we have a look at this, since this question is of, like I said, 1 mark, we could actually save ourselves times by simply writing down volunteer sampling or self-selecting sample. Now, let's quickly have a look at the things that are expected from let's quickly have a look at the things that a student should be avoiding. Number one, many students, what they do is, because they're not sure about what the answer would be, they write down multiple options. I mean, I've personally come across scripts where students end up writing volunteer and or random sampling. I mean, in this case, we understand as a student, you don't want to lose marks. We understand as a student, you're not sure about what the answer is. But then again, if you think by doing this would end up getting you a mark by chance, trust me, you're mistaken, because you would not. Now, again, if you have a look at the guidelines over here, the guidance over here, it very clearly states, take the first answer only. So if you've written volunteer sampling first, you'd get your mark. If you've written random sampling and or anything else, whatever the first thing that you would be writing would be marked over here. One. Number two, do not credit newspaper advertisements. Why not newspaper advertisements? Because the question very clearly is asking you to identify the sampling technique. And remember, a newspaper advertisement, we understand that magazines were used over there, but then again, that is not a sampling technique. For you to score the mark, use that particular sampling technique, that in this case is volunteer sampling. Do not credit selective. It's not selective, it's self-selecting, right? So there's a difference between you writing self-selecting sampling technique, or you end up writing selective, right? If you feel lazy, if you feel, oh, by writing selective you'd end up getting your marks, no, you do not. I hope that's clear, and that would help you avoid mistakes that many students do make. Number two, outline one hypothesis. Now, this question is this is 1B, right? So the first question is about Baron-Cohen, and which is divided into multiple parts. This was part A, this is part B, and this is part C. So we're still talking about Baron-Cohen et al. Now, outline one hypothesis in relation to the sex of the participants. One, outline one hypothesis. So what is being demanded from you is a hypothesis. You need to write down a hypothesis in relation to the sex of the participants. Now, again, you cannot just about the study by Baron-Cohen. There were multiple hypotheses that were used there. Remember, as I keep on saying, CAIE requires concrete learning. Concrete learning, when I use the word concrete learning, what I actually mean is you need to learn things as is. You cannot just and I think as it should be, if the examiner is being specific about knowing about a hypothesis related to something in specific, then you end up writing that to be able to score marks. If you're not catering to the second part, you might as well not get any mark at all, right? So I've read the question, I've understood the question, I quickly have a look at the marks that have been allotted to this, and I see there are 2 marks. So how is it that I could score a 2 on 2 on this? Let's have a look at the generic criteria that the examiners have, and then we move on and have a look at the specific examples. So this says 2 marks for a full prediction or hypothesis, 1 mark for a brief or a partial prediction or hypothesis. Now, an example of a full prediction would be females in group 2 or 3 will score higher than males on the ICE test. Now, this was a hypothesis, this was a prediction that females in groups 2 or 3 will score higher than males on the ICE test. Let me remind you, when we talk about participants from group 2 or 3, they were normal participants. When I use the word normal participants over here, I am referring to participants who are not autistic, right? So again, how do I differentiate between this 2 mark response and a 1 mark response? This 1 mark response over here says females in groups 2 and 3 will score higher on the ICE test. Now, just have a closer look at this. I might as well zoom this. I'll just zoom this. Compare this one highlighted in yellow with the one highlighted in green. Do you see the difference? It's a tiny difference, right? You're talking about uh, females scoring higher, right? But then females scoring higher as compared to who? This part. Then males on the ICE test. This is the part, or rather, then males. You simply miss this mark. You simply miss writing this. You could do that because you felt it wouldn't make any difference, or you could do that because you thought it would still be acceptable. Now, these are the typical mistakes that students make, which I think they should avoid. Now, this is more like you throwing away marks that you didn't really deserve to, right? So this is what gets you 2 marks, and as compared to this is what gets you 1 mark. Females will score higher. You write this, you'd not get any mark at all, right? And marks, females will score higher. I mean, that's so vague. Females will score higher. Are we talking about an essay writing competition? Are we talking about a cricket match? I mean, it's so vague. It doesn't need to be vague, right? It has to be to the point. And remember, many students, they feel, I've personally come across many students who feel that by implying something, they'd end up getting their marks. You would not. And as much as students wouldn't like me saying this, I don't check the CAIEs. But whoever does, they have a proper marking criteria. They would mark you only if you give an answer according to the demands of the question, right? So the demands of the question need to be understood. And then in relation to the amount of marks that have been allocated to that particular question, then you give a response. So if you have a look at this, we have another example. Alternatively, if you could use this, it would work too. Males in group 3 will score higher than females on the AQ, right? Remember, over here we were speaking about ICE test, over here we're speaking about AQ, right? Again, the same formula being used. If you simply do not talk about what you're comparing it with, you'd end up getting a single mark, you'd lose a mark. The third, if you simply write down males will score higher, you get 0 marks. So let's have a look at the guidance real quick. The guidance over here says group 2, that is normal community library users, and group 3 was normal students from the Cambridge University, if you remember. So the need there's a need for an indication of group to be awarded full credit. So you need to write down, you see over here you've mentioned group 2 or 3, over here you've mentioned group 3. Okay, need indication of groups to be awarded full credit. Number 2, females would score higher on the ET, that is I star. Females would score higher on the AQ. Neurotypical is fine for 2. Neurotypical, in this context, we're talking about participants who were not autistic. Do not accept better or worse, right? You cannot use statements that do not sound too absolute or too definite, right? Do not credit any result because they did not ask you for any result. They simply asked you to outline one hypothesis, right? You were asked to outline one hypothesis in relation to something in particular. Now, taking this ahead, the third question over here says, the third part that is of question 1. Outline the instructions that were given to participants on how to use the glossary, right? Now, again, I read the question, I understood the question. The question is demanding me to outline something. Outline what? Outline the instructions that were given to participants as to how they're supposed to use a glossary, right? So I have been asked to outline. This question is worth 2 marks again. So I better keep that in mind. If you have a look at the generic marking criteria, this says 1 mark should be avoided per point. Now, out of these 4 points that you have over here, write any 2. A typical, a frequently asked question over here is, can we write this in points? Yes, you can, right? But it's always better to write it in a paragraph. However, if you think you want to write it down in a in points, that should be okay as well. So they could read through the glossary, they could read through or refer to the glossary, they could indicate any words or meanings that they were unsure about. They could read those particular meanings once unsure of, that would help understand the words. They were told they could use the glossary throughout the test. So out of these 4 points over here, use any 2 points and you'd be able to score a 2 on 2 there. So the list is definitive. Do not credit told to use, as this is too close to the question. Now, again, like I had mentioned a couple of minutes earlier, as a student, when you are, I mean, I've been a student too, and I've been dealing with this subject for, I think, almost 2 decades now. It's been more than a decade and a half, for sure. Now, if I talk about this particular question, there's a possibility students might want to play safe, and they might want to write something by getting hints from the wordings of the question. Now, having a look at this, outline the instructions that were given to participants on how to use the glossary. If you end up saying, oh, they were told to use it, no, they were not. I mean, of course they were told to use it, but that doesn't really show your grip, your knowledge, your understanding of that particular core study. So if you've studied it, if you've learned it, if you've understood the question, if you know how to answer it, you might as well reproduce it on the paper according to the demands of the CAIE. So any 2 points from here, and you'd be able to get your marks. Before we move on to question number 2, now another frequently asked question that I come across is, sir, what if, I mean, there are students who end up asking, sir, could you, I mean, towards the end, when the examinations are have already begun and the psychology paper is in a few days, there'd be kids who'd walk up asking, sir, can you tell us about the important studies? See, let's use a bit of common sense over here. There are 12 core studies that are part of your syllabus. Paper 1 has 10 questions. What 2 studies would you want to miss? Remember, even if you are not getting any question on any particular study in any particular paper, there's always a possibility that you'd get you'd get questions on that particular study in paper 2. So not learning any study is not a very good decision. I'd like to reiterate, do not miss on any study. Learn all the studies. So outline the instructions that were given to participants on how to use the glossary, right? The question before this was outline 1 hypothesis in relation to the sex of participants. The question before that was identify the sampling technique used to recruit participants for group 1. Now, the point that I wanted to make over here was this question number 1 is, if you count this with this, if you add them together, it ends up making 5 marks. It's not only about not doing Baron-Cohen if you haven't done it as yet. Do you think you'd be able to afford to lose 5 marks? If not, then you shouldn't miss out on any study. So by not studying any particular research, by not learning content from a particular research, remember, there's always a possibility you might end up getting an evaluative question on it, a 10-mark question. Do you actually think you'd want to lose 10 marks out of 60? That would literally pull your grade down like anything. So yeah, you still have a few days. You might as well put them to use the right way. Moving on, question number 2, as I see this question is on Fagan et al. Okay, one more thing. Let me remind you, you do not get any choice. Psychology paper 1, paper 2, you do not get any choice at all. So from the study by Fagan et al., Elephant Learning, outline what is meant by the term positive reinforcement. Outline what is meant by the term positive reinforcement. And this happens to be a 2-mark question. So you are to outline what the term positive reinforcement means. Keep in mind there are 2 marks over there. So if there are 2 marks that have been allotted by Cambridge on this particular question, 1 mark, you shall get 1 mark for partial or brief definition. You should get the second mark for providing an example. Now, this example over here would help you develop your point, would help you show the examiner that you know what you're talking about. Now, an example of this could be, this is the addiction. I'll just zoom this just in case if it isn't visible enough. So this is the addition of something nice, reward of a behavior to increase the probability of repeating a behavior. So you write this, you get both your marks. You get the first mark from here, and here onwards, you get the second mark. Now, read through this and see if this makes sense to you. Now, if you've read this thoroughly, continuing ahead, the second example over here, it is giving a reward to someone / the elephants were given chopped bananas. If you want to connect it back to Fagan, if you end up writing this, you'd receive 1 mark, right? It is trying to help someone repeat a behavior. Over here, you get a single mark too. So you could either link it to the study, or you could invent an example of your own. But remember, to be able to score 2 on 2, you need to define what it is and give an example. So this was question 2A worth 2 marks. Let's take this ahead and move on to question number 2B. Question number 2B over here is of 3 marks. But before I could proceed, let's have a quick look at the demand of the question. Let's have a look at what the question over here demands from us. So this question over here says, outline one result in relation to the number of sessions it took for the elephants to pass the full trunk wash test. You must use data in your answer. So let's understand the question first. The question is asking us to outline what? One result in relation to, one result related to what? In relation to the number of sessions it took for the elephants to pass the full trunk wash test. Now, additionally, the question is demanding you to provide data, or in other words, quantitative data over here, quantitative data, right? Now, if I quickly have a look at the marks of the question, this particular question is of 3 marks over here. And if we have a look at what the mark distribution is, okay, before that, now there are many students that I come across who are not really good with rote learning numbers. So there's always a possibility you could end up getting a question like this, but just in case, if you're someone who's still struggling with the learning part, in this question in particular, you being able to write exact numbers would be worth 1 mark, right? So if I'm not asking you to not learn numbers, but if you think you're struggling with learning other things at this point, yes, this is worth 1 mark. So having a look at the generic marking criteria to begin with, 2 marks for the result with a meaningful comparison. So you need to write down about the result, and there should be meaningful comparison over here, right? And you get the second mark for providing correct data. So 2 marks from here, 1 mark from here, add them up together, you get 3 marks in total. Okay. So outline one result in relation to the number of sessions it took for the elephants to pass the full trunk wash test. You must use data in your answer. Now, for you to be able to score 3 marks, I mean, you could pick up, there are multiple results that you could use over here. Let's start with one. So this is an example of you scoring 3 marks. How would you score 3 marks over here? Elephant 2 took fewer. Now, you being clear that you're talking about elephant 2. For this, again, you need to know the study really well, concrete learning. So elephant 2 took fewer sessions to pass the trunk compared to elephant 4. It took elephant 2 25 sessions. Now, you being clear over here, it took elephant 2 25 sessions. So this is how you're receiving marks over here. Elephant 2 took fewer sessions. I'll just put this in a box so that you understand what part am I referring to. Okay, so this one. Outline one result in relation to the number of sessions it took for the elephant to pass the full trunk wash test. You must use data in your answer. So elephant 2 took fewer sessions to pass the trunk compared to elephant 4. Now this over here, you've provided result with meaningful comparison. This as so, ouch. this as compared to this is a meaningful comparison, right? I hope this annotation isn't confusing you here. I just clean it once you've understood it. So elephant 2 took fewer sessions to pass the trunk compared to elephant 4. This is how you're scoring 2 marks, right? And this is the data part. It took elephant 2 25 sessions. This 25 sessions is the part where we are providing data to be able to score a 3 on 3 in this particular question. Or alternatively, you could use another point that says the juvenile elephant passed within 25 to 35 sessions, all within 35 sessions, whereas the old elephants never passed. So again, a meaningful comparison. So we're talking about a comparison over here between juvenile elephants, and we're talking about a comparison between older elephants. So I hope this helps. Now, moving on to examples where the students would receive 2 marks, 2 marks for a meaningful comparison, but no data. I'll highlight this in pink. Moving on. Elephant 2 took fewer sessions to pass the trunk compared to elephant 4. Or you could say the juvenile elephants come passed within 25 to 35 sessions. So let's compare apple with apple. Here you go. So you write this. Let me clear this. Okay. So you write this part, you get 3 marks. You write this part, you get 2 marks. And if you have a closer look, the difference over here is in terms of the data that the question demanded. So an example of 1 mark again over here would be no meaningful comparison and no data. If you say elephant 2 required the least number of sessions to pass. Now see, just to cross check while you're attempting your paper, if you end up writing something like this, you cannot assume that for a 3-mark question, the examiner would end up giving you 3 on 3. And I think this is something that you should understand as well. So there was a question over here where you've been asked to outline a result in relation to something, and that something over here is in relation to the number of sessions it took for the elephants to pass the full trunk wash test. You must use data in your answer, right? So I hope this might have helped. Let's have a quick look at the guidelines provided, just so that you know this is something that has been advised by the Cambridge and it isn't merely an opinion by me. So the checkers have been provided guidelines to not tolerate any mistake when it comes to data. So if you want to score that 3rd mark, the data you're providing should be correct. So use tick D annotation when awarding the data mark. Okay, so that has more to do with checking. Like I said, this is a provisional marking scheme, so you would expect things like this ahead as well. The answer must refer to the number of sessions rather than whether they passed it or not. However, you can credit elephant 5 for not passing. So that's more of clarity. If comparison is based on correct data, then award maximum marks. So if comparison is based on correct data, so 1, there needs to be meaningful comparison. Number 2, there needs to be data. You meet both of those criteria. That is how you get a 3 on 3. So for the students who think, oh, it's difficult, oh, the checking, there are many students who end up blaming checking. Why would you blame checking? It's very simple. Rules have been set right at the beginning. I must have told you, I did tell you, your teacher, whoever your teacher is, must have told you about these rules. So it's for you to understand them, adapt to them, practice them. Now, the more you put your pen to paper, the better chances you hold of not making mistakes in your CI. So again, all of this has been picked up from here. This is just to give checkers an idea. Now this was 2A. 2A was of 2 marks. 2B is of 3 marks. That together makes it 5 marks again. So question one was of 5 marks. Question 1 was on Baron-Cohen. Question 2 is again of 5 marks, and question 2 was on the study by Fagan et al. Elephant learning. Now quickly moving on to question number 3. If you talk about question number 3, from the study by Piliavin et al., identify 2 features of one of the victims, right? So identify 2 features. Now this identification question, pretty simple, again, has a lot to do with the concrete learning that I keep on referring to. There were multiple features. Amongst these multiple features, you could use any 2 of them to be able to score 2 marks. I'd suggest if you know of 3, write 3. So they were males, they were aged between 26 to 35, they could be white or black, wore easy over jackets or old slacks, no tie, in the drunk condition, smelled of liquor, and held a bottle in a bag. I mean, you'd have to write this entire thing to be able to score a mark. Now, the guidelines over here, The list is definitive and you have to write something from here. Do not accept they were ill or drunk. They're not asking you if they were ill or drunk. They're asking you about specific features of the victims, the researchers who play the role of a victim over there. Do not accept acted as if drunk or ill. They're pretty linked, pretty clear, makes a lot of sense. Accept casual clothing instead of this. So the examiners being nice enough, they could mark you and then write down a BOD. BOD refers to benefit of doubt. Either drunk or ill with cane would give you 0 marks. 3 white males would give you 0 marks too, because you need to identify proper features over here. Taking this ahead, these guidelines, they are to ensure that uh, the system is being fair, and students who are trying to bluff and gain marks, they are discouraged. The next one, explain why this study is from social approach. Now, why this study is from social approach, this study, and what study are we talking about? Talking about the study by Piliavin et al. This is a continuation. The first part was 3A, the second part is 3B. Explain why the studies from the social approach in psychology. So to be able to score 2 marks, you need to write down, you need to clearly link the study with the social approach, either through an example or you could use an assumption. An example of that would be, one of the assumptions of the social approach is that behavior is influenced by other individuals. This is where you're getting the first mark. Remember, this is a 2-mark question. Okay. Now this, again, you've been asked to explain, and this question happens to be a 2-mark question. Do not forget this. Now, this was clearly shown here as few people helped when a model had already offered help compared to when no model was present. So make sure you're not losing marks unnecessarily. Do not throw away marks. If you know it, you might as well write it in a manner that you do not end up losing marks. I've come across students, they'd be like, if I'm reviewing your paper, when the student's standing in front of me, the student will be like, sir, but I know it. I probably do think you knew it, but guess what? That isn't sufficient for me to be able to give reward marks over there. Your script, the answer that you've written in the script should show that you know it. You marked on the basis of what you've written on the script, right? You marked in terms of how clear you are when you wrote whatever you wrote in your script, right? You try bluffing, you lose marks. You provide an incorrect answer, you lose marks. You try writing something that you think might confuse the examiner, and the examiner might end up giving you a mark. Trust me, that doesn't happen. So taking this ahead, this was an example of 2 marks. I showed you the yellow highlighted part shows you how the student could score the first mark, and the green highlighted part would show you how the student would get the second mark. Now, an example of 1 mark, they were affected by the social context of witnessing a drunk person needing help, 1 mark. When there was a larger group, it affected the behavior as they were faster at helping. Again, you get a single mark. So I think for you to be able to compare, for you to be able to understand how you're getting a 2 mark, how you awarded 2 marks over here, you compare this with either of these two. So this was question number 3. Question number 3A and question number 3B. Question number 3A was of 2 marks. Question number 3B was of 2 marks again. So question number 3 in total was of 4 marks. Taking this ahead, moving on to the study, which is a recent addition, the study that was conducted by Hölzel et al. And this study is about mindfulness and brain scans. Outline 1 aim of the study. Now, for aims, I keep on asking students to try rote learning it. You might as well rote learn it from the Cambridge course book, or you might as well rote learn it through the research paper, but try rote learning it. I have come across many students who end up believing that you've provided a correct answer, which in some cases, not all, uh, ends up in a sentence that has a totally different meaning. So yeah, taking this ahead, you get 2 marks for full aim. To investigate the effect of mindfulness stress reduction on brain density, you write that, you get 2 marks straight away. There are other alternative options for single mark as well. There is an example of how you would not receive any mark at all. For instance, if you write to investigate mindfulness, okay, let's not assume that the system is, let's not assume that the system can be fooled very easily. This is a study on mindfulness, so you cannot just write to investigate mindfulness and end up receiving a mark. So yeah, taking this ahead, another question from the study by Hölzel et al., which again demands concrete learning. The question over here says, acting with awareness was measured by the five facet mindfulness questionnaire. Outline one other factor of mindfulness measured by this question. So anything from here, for this, again, you need to have an understanding. You need to know the elements that were there in the five-facet mindfulness questionnaire. So you get the first mark for naming the factor. You get the second mark for outlining the factor. Something such as this would help you score 2 marks. For instance, if you write down observing observation, first mark, and the second mark, this is about attending to internal, external stimuli. Now, hopefully I do not forget towards the end. I'd like to show again the command words that are, I might as well just write it down so that I don't forget, hopefully. So for command words, I'd suggest, I'd strongly advise that you all go through your command words and what the examiner means when when they use the word outline, what they mean when they use the word explain, what they mean when they use the word identifies, when they use the word describe, when they use the word evaluate, so on and so forth. So this is how you're getting the first mark, and this is how you're getting the second mark. Taking it ahead, question number 5, that says outline one assumption of cognitive approach in psychology. So you know your assumptions. You should know your assumptions well. Uh, a full assumption over here, an example of, we're talking about cognitive psychology. This happens to be a 2-mark question. I'm trying to be a little fast for that because I know your time counts and your time counts a lot here. Information is processed through the same route in all humans. That is an input, process, and output system. This I'm sure you studied in grade 6, grade 7 in computers, in a similar way to how information is processed by computers. So what we're talking about over here is this information processed in humans as compared to information being processed in computers. Okay. Now, taking this ahead, people have individual differences in the cognitive processing, such as with attention, language, thinking, and memory. This would give you a single mark. And another example of 1 mark would be information is processed through the same route in all humans, input, process, output. People have individual differences in their cognitive processes. So make a comparison. I mean, I'm sure you'd be able to understand this in itself is pretty self-explanatory. You see what it takes to be able to score 2 marks and what it takes to be able to score 1 mark. Like I mentioned a couple of minutes earlier, it's not about me being strict. It's about, I mean, I'm trying to guide you how to not lose marks, because the rules are not set by me. The rules are set by the Cambridge, and I think they have set rules, trying to ensure that no one gets any unfair mark, and trying to ensure that no one loses any mark in an unfair manner too. So number 2, explain how one finding from the study. Okay, another important thing that I'd want you to not miss on, especially when you talk about questions on assumptions, when you're talking about questions on assumptions, you need to see, when you're talking about questions on assumptions, you need to use an assumption, keeping in mind that the next question might be linked to the assumption that you provided in the answer, right? I hope I've made sense there. While writing or while answering a question on assumptions, you pause for, let's just say, 5 seconds and read the following question, right? They'd probably, if the following question is linked to the A part, then you need to be very choosy, very selective about what the answer you want to provide for this 2 marker. So explain how one finding from the study by Pozzolo et al. Supports the assumption you outlined in part A. So again, the assumption that you outlined in part A, the answer that you're providing in part B should be linked to A, right? This is what I was talking about. Now, taking this ahead, an example of this could be children correctly identified 99% of the cartoon faces. This was the mark there for the results you provided. This could follow the principles of input, that is seeing cartoon, processes, that is memory of cartoon, and output, that is recall cartoon. This is how you're scoring the first mark. And this is how you're scoring the second mark that I've highlighted over here in green. So what I was saying a minute earlier was, if you're choosing this input output example, do so keeping in mind the second question, right? Because if it is linked to the first part, you don't want to lose marks there, and you do not want to cut it and then make corrections again. Of course, that takes a lot of time and makes the paper messier. So if the link is not with assumption from 0.5 from 5a, can only be awarded the result or conclusion mark, that is 1 mark. You cannot simply restate the assumption from second mark for the second mark. Many students, I've personally seen students do that as well. So you need to link it to the study. The first part of the question is asking you to outline one assumption of the cognitive approach. The second part of the question is asking you to explain one finding from that particular study. The study was by Pozzolo et al., while supporting the assumption that you mentioned earlier. So that's how you score 2 marks in each. Taking this quickly ahead, the third part. So for Pozzolo, the examiner thought of giving 3 sub questions, 3 questions of 2 marks each, 2 from here, 2 from here, and 2 from here. Now outline the term false positive responses using an example from the study by Pozzolo. So you need to explain false positive responses in relation to the study by Pozzolo et al. This is when a person believes they are making an accurate choice, but it is not. You write that, you get a single mark. In the Pozzolo study by this would be the children choosing a person in a lineup, even though the culprit is not in the lineup. So the first mark for a definition, the second mark for an example. So as I put it, the first mark from here and the second mark from here. Taking it quickly ahead, the sixth question is on Milgram. In the study by Milgram, obedience, participants took a piece of paper from a hat. They were told that this would decide whether they would be the teacher or the learner. Describe the procedure from this point until the learning task began. Now, if you have a look at the past papers, now Milgram, if I talk about Milgram has been a part of the syllabus for good about 17 years from what I can recall. I'm not sure if it was a part of the syllabus even before that too. So Milgram is a study that many teachers use as a first study to build in some interest students, built in some interest in students who plan on taking A-level psychology. Milgram study is a classic study. Yes, it was unethical. Nonetheless, the psychology that they were investigating there, the findings, the conclusions, the conclusions, they helped not only psychology, but they helped us, a common man, to be able to learn what destructive how bad destructive obedience could be. So yeah, I wouldn't get into details regarding that. The point that I was trying to make is, so for what I recall from, say, good about 7-8 years back, you would just get questions from a particular study where they'd ask you to describe the procedure of a study. However, relatively recently, I'd say, examiners have started asking the procedure from point A to point B, right? Like in a plot, like a plot for a movie or any particular study. First, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, and this happens. So even if you talk about this question in particular, this question says, describe the procedure from this point until the learning task began. Now, from this point, what's that? This point, that this point is here. They took a piece of paper from a hat. They were told that this would decide whether they would be the teacher or the learner. So you are asked to, let's just say this is point A, this is point B. You are asked to describe the procedure between point A to point B. Now, again, you could write a lot, but before that, this is a question on description. This is a 4-mark question. And this being a 4-mark question, you are expected to write at least 4 correct points, right? So out of the numerous amount of options that you have over here, you could pause and read. Milgram is believed by many to be the easiest of study. But then again, remember, additionally, okay, easy, if just because you think a study is easy, you need to remind yourself that is it easy enough, or do you know it well enough that you'd be able to write things correctly in relation to the demands of the question. If not, no one's going to ask you to tell them verbally what happened in Milgram. Had that been the case, yes, I would have believed this is a very easy and an interesting study. But remember, even when I say, for what I recall, this study has been a part of the syllabus for good about 17, 18 years. This, you still end up getting questions on Milgram that appear to be challenging for students. So you better think twice before you just ignore this. Another thing additionally, be it an easy study, had I been a student, I would have focused equally on an easy study as compared to a study that I find challenging. The reason is we should remind ourselves that we would get questions on easy studies and we should get questions on challenging studies too. So imagine for a bit if you're getting a question on a study that all year you thought was the easiest, and you, just because in the back of your mind you had an idea about what happened in the study and you did not do concrete learning, you might end up losing marks on it, and it wouldn't feel very good knowing that. So does this happen? Yes, this happens, and I think it happens more than students think it happens. So yeah, numerous amount of options you have over here. You get 1 mark for correct point. It's a 4 mark question. Had I been a student, I would have written at least 5 to 6 points. And if you give these points a read, they're super simple as well. Now, taking this ahead, moving on to 6B. Explain one strength of this study in relation to reliability. So the strength of the study that was conducted by Milgram, in relation to what? In relation to reliability of a study. It's a 2 mark question. To be able to score 2 marks, you need to write down a strength in relation to reliability, and this should be linked to the study from Milgram. Now, taking this quickly ahead, how do you score a 2 on 2 here? I think this pencil requires charging. So you get 1 mark for standardization and replication, that is identification of the strength, and 1 mark for example from the study. So if you end up writing something like this, the procedure was standardized, so could be replicated. For example, all the participants received a 45-mark shock. You get the first mark here, and the second mark, I'll just highlight it with another color, and the second mark from what you've written in green. I come across students who would be like, oh sir, but how would I know what would give you marks? What would give me marks? You read the question again. If you've listened to what I'm saying, you read the question again. Read the question again, read it in your native language, in your mother tongue. Try understanding what the examiner is trying to demand, right? Trust me, it's not difficult. So explain one strength of the study in relation to reliability. One strength of the study in relation to reliability. Now, the procedure was standardized, so it could be replicated. So that's a strength. For example, and I think you would know that standardized procedure makes replication easier. More replication being easier leads to high chance of your study being reliable. For example, all participants received a 45-volt shock. Now, moving on to question number 7 real quick. Question number 7 over here reads, your friend Tara needs your help. Okay, let's help Tara now. Your friend Tara needs your help. She has volunteered to take part in a study that is replicating Dement and Kleitman, that is sleep and dreams. So you have a friend, your friend's name is Tara, and she has volunteered to take part in a study that is replicating Dement and Kleitman. She wants to know how she will be woken up and then asked about a dream. So again, you have a question on procedure. Now, did you notice you have had 2 questions of 4 marks each on procedure? So for the students who be like, oh, sir, is the procedure important? I think you have an answer to it, right? And outline this part of the procedure for Tara. Now, how do you score marks here? You could probably write, you will then be, no, wait. So this, let me read this again. See, I'm reading it again. And you shouldn't shy reading questions again. Read it once, twice, thrice. If you read it well, you understand it well. You understand it well, you'd be able to score well. Keep that in mind. So your friend Tara needs your help. She has volunteered to take part in a study that is replicating Dement and Kleitman. Understood. She wants to know how she will be woken up. Okay, she wants to know how she will be woken up, and then asked about the dreams. Do you see there are 2 things being demanded here? There are 2 things that in particular hold importance. Number one, how Tara would be woken up, and how she would be asked about her dreams. So this is one part, and this is second part. Now, for the first part, how she would be woken up. You will be woken up by a doorbell. It will be loud enough to wake you up. And about the dream part, you will then be asked if you were having a dream or not. Then you will be asked to tell the experimenter about the content of your dream. You will be asked to talk into a recording device. The experimenter may come if they want more information about your dream. You may be asked to estimate dream duration. May. I don't know if you noted. So again, you get a single mark for every correct point that you provided. You could get 2 marks from here. You could write down 2 points from here and get the rest 2 marks too. Having a quick look at the guidelines, it says go with the intention of the examiner. See, I did not write this. For the ones who think they can bluff around and score marks, Even the examiner, the principal examiner, the P is providing directions, is providing guidelines to the checkers to go with the intention of the candidate. For example, if they use more technologically advanced ways to wake up Tara or help her record the dreams, this is perfectly credit worthy. Do not credit pure repetition of the stem. Woken via a loud bell would give you 2 marks. Annotation, okay, this is the guidelines provided to the examiner while checking the answer. I hope you've understood this. Moving on to the eighth question real quick. This eighth question over here reads, Saira is talking about the study by Saavedra and Silverman. All right. She says that the findings were subjective. Okay, so Sarah feels the findings of the study by Saavedra and Silverman were subjective. Explain why Saira, it's okay, I'm sorry, it's Saira. So explain why Saira is correct that the findings were subjective using evidence from the study in your answer. Again, it's a question that is demanding explanation. It's a question worth 4 marks. You are to explain why Sarah is correct if she feels that the findings was subjective, and you are expected to provide evidence as well. So yeah, the examples that could be used over here, being subjective is about feeling. Again, see, this requires your knowledge on the study, concrete learning, and this requires you knowing what subjectivity is, you knowing, you being able to scrutinize, you being able to discuss, and you being able to evaluate or gauge the study, right? So do not miss on the strengths and weaknesses. Of course, you can't. Towards the end, there's a 10-mark question, evaluative essay question awaiting you. So taking this ahead, the generic marking criteria is up to 1 mark available for defining subjective, up to 4 marks available for per correct point made based on evidence. So if you are able to define subjectivity, you would get a mark for that too. Being subjective is about feeling emotions from the viewpoint of the individual. The boy rated his fear of each button himself because he was doing it himself. That was his subjective rating. But his level of fear for certain buttons are not comparable with other people with the same phobia. This is how he's scoring the 3rd mark. He also had an experience that he felt affected him in the classroom. Now, these could be the points that you could possibly use. In questions like these, where you're getting a single mark per correct point, and I think after practicing a few questions, you would understand what sort of questions are they. Try using, if it's a 4-mark question, try writing 4 points. Try writing more than 4 points. Try writing 5.6 points, correct points, right? Because you don't want to take a chance. So again, the guidelines over here says go with the intention of the candidate, ignore answers about it not being subjective, being objective. Again, students who try bluffing, accept subjectivity of the researchers and subjectivity of the boy. I mean, you could use the word subjectivity from, I mean, you could put subjectivity to use from both sides, from the researcher sides and from the boy side. Ignore tautological responses. Tautological responses, or when students, they try saying something and then rephrasing it and saying it again. So ignore repetition of the statements that you're making. You can't just rephrase and say the same thing again and then expect that the examiner would give you marks there. Accept any example from the study that is about experience or feeling before the study, during the study, and even after the study. A comparison to others lack generalizability mark can only be awarded once. I mean, you could yeah, students at times, like I mentioned a minute earlier, students try to gain marks out of a point multiple times. That doesn't happen. The examiners, they wouldn't fall a victim to that. Do not credit subjective as he was the only participant. Do not just credit subjective because he was the only participant. If you know the study, you'd understand this. Responses that focus on bias or difficult to know if he is telling the truth are credit worthy again. So this was question number 8, worth 4 marks. Question number 9, real quick. The question over here is from the study by Andrade. So this question over here, describe the sample used in the study by Andrade. So you get 1 mark for each correct point, right? So you are to describe the sample. It's a 4-mark question. And these are the questions that would help you score real well. They're super simple. But bear this thing in mind, you have been asked to describe. You haven't been asked to identify. Had you been asked to identify, you could have simply written the answer in points and gotten your marks. But over here, you've been asked to describe instead of identify. So again, like I said, this question is demanding you to describe the sample used in the study by Andrade. Having a quick look at this, one, it was an opportunity sample. They had just finished a different study. Now, when the examiner used the word describe, you If you simply mention it was an opportunity sample, you're just identifying the sample, you're not describing it. Remember, the question is asking you to describe it. So yeah, it was an opportunity sample. They, that is the participants, they just finished a different study, that is before being asked to participate in this one, which I'm sure you would know if you've studied the studied the this particular research well. There was another study that they were participating. For that study, they had volunteered. However, for this study, because there was these participants who were walking out of the room, they were asked by Andrade if they would want to participate in another study that wouldn't take long. That's what it means. That's what the examiner means when they use the word describe. So describe the sample used in the study by Andrade. It was an opportunity sample. They had just finished a different study before being asked to participate in this one. There were 14 total. There were members of a university participant panel. There were members from the general population aged 18 to 55. They were paid for participation. Majority of them were females. So let's have a look at the guidelines provided to the paper checkers. This list is definitive except males and females. No tolerance on age range. So yeah, there are students who would be like, oh sir, what if, I mean, if you're talking about age, if you're talking about numbers, quantitative data, at times what happens is students, they have, I mean, if you having a look at the mean or the standard deviation, you'd come across data in points. Yeah, you could round that off, but at the same time, you need to be careful not to mess up with the numbers. Rounding off is okay, right? But not to mess up with numbers totally. And I keep on saying this to my students very often, but this is, I think, very evident if you have a look at this. So yeah, taking this ahead to the second part of the ninth question, which over here reads, explain one similarity and one difference between the study by Andrade and the study by Pozzolo. So this is a very typical 8 marker if you have a look at the past paper questions. Yeah, for the past paper questions, there are many students who would be like, oh, sir, the syllabus just changed. If the syllabus just changed, yes, there are there are still 7 studies that have been taught before as well, and you could use past papers from there to use. There are just 5 studies that are new. So again, explain one similarity and one difference between the study by Andrade and the study by Pozzolo et al. So these are the questions that are marked on the basis of levels, and I have provided a video on the study by Hassett et al. Where attempting an 8 marker, I've spoken about how an 8 marker should ideally be attempted. You haven't come across the video, you could ask it, you could ask me, I could just share the link to the video with you. So for level 4, there must be some attempt at explaining the similarity or difference. So how do you go about with this? Number one, you identify the similarity, right? I'll just quickly tell you how to go about with it. Number one, you identify what the strength is, what the similarity is. And then let's just say if you're using this study is using, they were both experimental in nature, right? Then you write down about the you elaborate on that experimental nature. Then you pick up content from the study by Andrade and write down about its experimental nature. And then you pick up content from Pozzolo and write down about its experimental nature to be able to score a 4 on 4. Remember, this is an 8 mark question. They are asking you about 2 different things. Treat this, you might as well treat this as 2 different questions of 4 marks each. You explain one similarity, 4 marks. You explain one difference, 4 marks. And the explanation, I told you what the explanation over here entails. You identify it, you get a single mark. You elaborate on that similarity, you get the second mark. You bring in content from one study, you get the 3rd mark. You bring in content from the 4th study, you get the 4th mark. Having a quick look at this, this reads, both Andrade and Pozzolo studies were experimental in nature. For example, both studies have manipulated IVs. Now, wait a second, I'll just use different colors so that you understand. Okay, this is the point being identified. This is when you have developed it. For example, both studies have had manipulated IVs. 3rd mark in Andrade's study, there were 2 conditions of doodling and not doodling. And the 4th mark, I'd use pink, yellow again. Pozzolo, there was also 2 conditions of age, type, Therefore, this additionally could be a good way to end it. Therefore, both were trying to establish cause and effect relationship. So this is how you could use, this is the format that you could use to be able to score a 4 and 4. 4 and 4 for similarity and 4 and 4 for differences. Taking this quickly ahead, I mean, there are again more points over here where you understand, where you'd have a better understanding as to how the examiner would give 3 marks for a point, how the examiner would give 2 marks for a point, and how the examiner would give a single mark. This is the generic criteria used for questions of similar nature. Now, if the candidate mixes up the names of the studies and or terminology, then L2 max and annotate with NBOD. NBOD is no benefit of doubt. I mean, I use these terms very often in my classes. If you have come across a checked script, you'd see terms such as annotations such as BOD, written BOD is benefit of doubt, NBOD is no benefit of doubt. Taking this ahead, the infamous evaluative essay question, which is very simple. I think students should not miss a single mark on this. So there are 12 studies, remember, learn 2 strengths and 2 limitations, and you'd be able to and learn the right way to attempt this question, and there isn't any reason for you to not score marks. Again, I have attempted a 10-mark question on evaluative question on Hassett et al. Coincidentally, Hassett et al. If you if you want, I could send you a link to that so that you understand how you should ideally attempt this 10 marker evaluative essay question. Bear this thing in mind. When in the video that I've tried explaining you how to attempt an evaluative essay question, this is not a format that has been prescribed by the Cambridge. No, it's not. This is just how, as a teacher, because I have attended quite a lot of workshops on this in the last 10-15 years. I think that's a way or a format that you could use to discipline yourself, to make yourself, to help yourself write an answer in a more consistent manner where you stand close to none chances of losing marks. So if you have a look at this, this says the sample only had 34 rhesus monkey as part of it. Okay, so for this question, I'm sorry, while trying to rush through this, I don't want to miss on any point. So the question over here reads, evaluate the study by Hassett et al. In terms of 2 strengths and 2 limitations. At least one of your evaluative points should be about ethics. So you are expected to write down 2 strengths, 2 limitations or weaknesses. Out of those 4 points that you are to write down, evaluate one of them at least should be on ethics. So having a look at this, this says the sample only had 34 rhesus monkeys as part of it. This could make generalization difficult. This is because some of the group were not used in the study as they were too young to be reliably identified, and they may have played differently, chosen different toys from a captivity troop. Therefore, the findings about monkey toy preferences may only apply to those in the sample, not apply to monkeys who live in the wild where choices are not available. Now, this point is not about ethics. I mean, ideally, the examiner should have provided a point related to ethics, but they chose not to. They chose a point related to generalizability, and they've explained it, and look how they have come up to a conclusion over here as well. Now, this is again the generic criteria that is used for questions like these. This is the last question where you are marked in terms of levels, level 5, level 4, level 3. For you to be able to score a 10 on 10, you should score over here where your answers range between 9 to 10 marks. Very good evaluation, including the named issue. So the named issue should be there, and this is the named issue, just in case if you do not know. So thoroughly address both strengths and weaknesses. Selection of evidence is very thorough and effective. So be sure about what you're choosing to give to the examiner. Do not just write down anything that occurs to you. Yeah, these are a few guidelines. You might as well read through them. And yeah, and again, so this is what you'd be interested in. I'm sure you don't want to score anywhere over here, but just in case if you want to give this a read. Now, I tried to help you through with knowing what it is that helps you score well and what is it that would hold you back from scoring marks. I think I wouldn't want to take more of your time. Time is precious, and concrete learning is what would give you marks. Do not miss on any study. The command words part, let me show you the command words real quick, and then I'd end this video. Yeah, these are the command words that are present in the syllabus. You might as well, if you want to know what they are, you might as well take a screenshot here and try to understand them. If not, they're available on the website by Cambridge as well. See, you should know what the examiner means when they use words suggest, state, outline, identify, give, explain, evaluate, describe, define, compare, or analyze. Another important thing that I'd like to share with you all. Now, this particular slide that you all see, how do you, how, if you want to gauge, if you want to see if you are prepared well for your paper 1, remember, these are the things that the examiner wants you to know regarding paper 1. consider a study. I mean, there are students who would, while communicating, while speaking to each other, they're like, oh, I know this, or I don't know this. For you to know if you want, if for you to know if you're prepared for a study, you should know all of this. The list, the entire list that you have over here could get questions on any of these. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful. Take good care of yourselves. All the best for your paper one, and thank you.